All right, everybody, here we are for the third episode in the triple shot of the Bay Ragni show today on Wednesday. And nothing, no disrespect to my prior guest today, but I got to say, this is the show I've been waiting to do all day. Actually, I've been waiting to do this show for 30 years now because I've known this guy for 30 years. He's done more for me than he probably even realizes. And uh, whatever rumors you've heard, he's not my father. I swear to you. Let's welcome to the show the legendary and the true Philadelphia Godfather of professional wrestling, Mr. Joel Goodhart. Joel, how the hell are you doing?
Man, how's Nashville? How's everything going with you? I'm looking forward to this too all day. I woke up this morning and I kept thinking about Chubby Dudley, and he's not chubby anymore, but I'm going to talk to Chubby.
So, first off, Nashville is great. I can't believe I'm here. I never would have ever, in my wildest imagination, thought I would leave the Philadelphia area and go anywhere, especially Nashville. But I'm here, and it was probably the best thing I've ever done in my life. And did you end up coming here? You said you were going to come here.
Yeah, I wound up not coming here. There's a long story to that. I will tell you, my daughter was in Nashville for 5 years for business, and I went down there a number of times. Great city. Absolutely great town. Yep.
It is. It's a fun town, and yeah. We
and
can
I
all
used
talk all
I
about
used
that.
to many years ago go to Nashville Fairgrounds to go see professional wrestling. When we used to do our Memphis tour, we would go out to Nashville and see the matches there on Saturday night.
I live 10 minutes from there.
Really?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
It's crazy. It's so crazy. So,
there's some great stories about that too.
Which, before we get into this, you have told me for quite a few years that you are writing a book. Is that still a reality?
Yes,
Is that going to
right
happen?
now it looks like it's going to be completed in February.
Okay.
I've been very fortunate. I have two co-writers, Dan Murphy and Scott Teal.
Okay.
They've never worked together on a book. Both these guys have, if you know anything about the articles and books in wrestling, they produce most of those books. So hopefully come February, my goal is by the end of March, it's definitely done, but the book will be finished by February.
Wow. It's so crazy. The life that has gone on in the 30 plus years in wrestling, and something even crazier. Like I heard your son was in the background helping you get situated before we went live. I'm thinking to myself, I don't even think he was born back then.
He's 41 now.
Oh, he was born. Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
He's 41 now. So he was back in the late 80s, early 90s. You know,
10 years old.
It's amazing. He was 10 years old. When I did my shows at Temple University, he was probably 6 or 7.
Wow.
My other son, who's a couple of years younger than Ross, Mark, was 3 or 4. And they used to sell my programs. And what's really scary, my daughter, who's going to be 30 on February 5th, she was born 3 weeks after I left or retired from the wrestling business.
Okay.
So everything that Danielle ever sees about me in wrestling, she had no clue.
No idea. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Crazy. So, okay. So your daughter was the one then that we never got to meet because everything had closed up. We knew she was coming, but everything closed up.
Yep.
Okay. But before that, like even before you got into the wrestling business, like growing up, were you always like a big fan of wrestling or?
Yeah, I was a fan, and by extension, my father was a fan.
Okay.
And at the Philadelphia Arena, my father used to take me to the matches. And my father had connections to get seated on the floor. True story. And I would go to these matches, and this is old school. And I'm at the Philadelphia Arena, and there's a match between Bruno Sammartino and George the Animal Steele. And what was amazing was these guys battled out of the ring, down the aisle, and went out on Market Street. And really? Bruno slammed George Animal Steele into one of the cars. Now, again, coming back from the car, George the Animal Steele actually stepped on my foot because I was on the aisle. And years later, when I came into the business and I got to meet George and we talked about it, now he could have BS'd me for all I know, but he remembered the match and he remembered him stepping on a kid's toe. Well, if he was telling the truth, that was my toe.
That's
So I
funny.
always went. I loved the matches. They are what they were. I was the guy that every Saturday morning watched it on television. Back in the day when kayfabe was strong,
Mhm.
you never really knew.
Yeah.
Okay, and I started. I loved Spiros Arion. I always liked the bad guys, but I would have Spiros Arion come on, and he was my guy. And I could go through superstar Billy Graham, who was quite frankly the first Hulk Hogan.
Right.
He was just a generation too early. Superstar Billy Graham, who again I got to meet later in my career. I mean, I used to watch this stuff all the time, and ultimately got into the business. I don't know if you want to get into this, but
Yeah.
I had met Carmella and Paul,
Okay.
who were partners in a lot of what I did. And Paul one time called me up and said to me, by the way, I've got 2 front row seats for matches at the Philadelphia Civic Center. Do you want to go? Well, this was out of nowhere. I hadn't been to a wrestling match in 20 years. Well, 15 years.
Okay.
And sure enough, I go to the matches, and there I am on the front row, and in the ring is the Road Warriors and the Rock and Roll Express. I can go down the names, Flair, the whole 9 yards. And we wound up going to those matches sitting on the front row just
Okay.
about every time. I don't know how he got the tickets. Well, one day there was a guy walking in a suit and tie, a guy walking around the ring, and he just looked like he was important. So, you know, I'm a kind of aggressive guy. I'm not going to let that stand in my way. So I asked him. I said, I'm not sure who you are, but you look like somebody I need to know. The guy's name was Elliot Murnick.
Okay.
Now, if anybody's watching this and was in the business, you know who Elliot Murnick was. Elliot passed away in the last year or two. But Elliot was Crockett's eyes and ears here in Philadelphia. So when I met Elliot Murnick and I introduced myself, he said to me, why don't you come back to the hotel? We'll talk after the show. Well, I never went back to the Marriott. Okay, everybody knew the Marriott at the airport. I never went back. I go back there, and people left the Civic Center to get there early.
Mm-hmm.
I get there. Elliot comes in, kept his word, and we sat down and we talked. And so I got to meet the guy who was Crockett's eyes and ears.
Okay.
Now, where that starts is that after about 3 or 4 times of seeing each other at the matches, he asked me for my office number. He calls me at the office and he says, do you mind if we have a telephone? Back then, there was no internet.
Right.
There was none of this. Okay. There was certainly none of this podcast. And he said to me, we need to do a show, I believe on a Wednesday night up here in your Philadelphia area. You know the area. Can you do the running for me? I wouldn't know where to start. Well, I go back. Carmella and I talk about it. One thing leads to the other. And it happened to be that I had a contact at the Sheraton Valley Forge in King of Prussia. And sure enough, I go to see him, and that building was not laid out for wrestling. It was a horrendous building for wrestling.
Okay.
But it was an opening. The numbers worked. I call up Murnick. We get the numbers down, and it was a weeknight. And Jim Cornette actually did a promo where he asked, "Who is this King of Prussia?" And so that's not. But anyway, long story short, I believe it was a Wednesday night. This was the time back then when the Crockett people had private jets to fly their guys in. I get a phone call at about 4:00 that they're still in Charlotte. They haven't left. They're fogged in, and we don't know what to do. Well, okay, here I have, doing a weeknight, I have young kids coming with parents.
Mm-hmm.
We did the show at 7:00 so they would get out at a reasonable time. Well, here they were, 4:00, they were still in Charlotte. I get a phone call. I get my times mixed up, but give or take 5:00. And the 2 planes flew in. They kept the heels on one plane and baby faces on the other. And they landed in Philadelphia. And it was after 7:00 when they landed. And here we're announcing from the ring, they're coming. Anyway, I get the 2 guys get a police escort. Okay, 3 guys, excuse me, get a police escort to get them to to Valley Forge before the buses do. So my first match, I had Tully Blanchard against Jimmy Boogie Woogie Man Valiant, okay, with J.J. Dillon. And this was not a match that was previously scheduled. They actually changed in the car. They came into the building and we announced them. And so we got the matches started. Okay. And I still have people to this day who were at that match. In fact, one of the guys in my office, I have a financial services practice. One of the guys in my office had his kids there. And we still to this day talk about, he claims it was almost 8:30 when it started. Okay. And we had the rock and roll, we had the midnight, we had Flair wasn't on it. We had Nikita, we had Dustin. We had a B show. Okay. And we must have had I'm going to say 1,000 people. It was amazing. We promoted it. We did a hell of a job. We did it, quite frankly, through the radio show that we had at the time. And again, we can talk about that.
Uh-huh.
Now, the real true story to that match, the matches went off. We got it done. We then did an independent card, several months later. And my main event was Abdul the Butcher versus Bruiser Brody. Okay. And back in the day, they were tearing it up.
Mm-hmm.
That not only did they tear it up, at the end of the night, I got a bill from the Sheraton Valley Forge for $2,800 for broken tables and chairs. Okay. So I wound up losing money because of the broken tables and chairs. Now, how do you tell these guys before time don't break tables and chairs?
Yeah.
That invoice is laying around somewhere. But that got my start in promoting, because I never got into promotion. We were on the radio. We had a store. We had an idea. It was actually Carmela's idea originally of opening up a wrestling store. And I had a business background to a certain extent, so we kind of put it together. And I knew that with my practice, I couldn't work the wrestling stuff during the week. Mm-hmm. So we wound up opening our wrestling store, the Squared Circle. We wound up opening it up at the I-95 marketplace, which is no longer around. But they were only open on Fridays and Saturdays.
See, I had no idea this whole thing was going on with, you, Carmela, the radio show and all, sure, until I didn't learn about all this until like 1990.
Yep.
And then I met you later that year and got started in school. So how did you and Carmela, like, did you guys start the Square Circle store first, the fan club? Like, what came first?
All right. So the store came first.
Okay.
Now, opening day, we actually had Bruno Sammartino and Dominic DeNucci there for autographs.
Okay.
Okay. Think about this. Again, no internet, no anything. How do you promote that you're opening a store?
Not only that, like at that time, well, maybe, what year was this about?
Well, this is when Hogan became big.
Okay.
Okay.
So there was a start of merchandise then, not like it is today. But
this was 87, 88. Carmelo would probably be better with the dates. But we opened the store, and we had all kinds of stuff in there, and we had a TV. And we didn't have a big screen TV. We had a regular television running wrestling tapes.
Okay.
So people would literally come to our store on Saturday and be there all day.
Watching wrestling.
And what happened, it became a hangout. And if you were a wrestling fan, it was a great place to be. They would eat from the restaurants in the I-95 marketplace. They may have bought a comic book from us or a book from us. Point is that we got started, and somewhere in that, somebody walks in our store who's dressed up. His name is Roger Crone, who has since passed away. And Roger Crone says to me and Carmela, "Did you guys ever consider having a radio show?" And our answer was no. Who the heck even thought of having a wrestling show?
Right.
Well, he said he was a sales rep from WTTM in Trenton, which is still around.
Okay.
And why not consider buying time on Saturday morning? And since the radio station was about a half hour from the store, and our store was open, I believe, at 9 o'clock, we could go on at 8 o'clock. And it would cost us $75 for a half hour.
Wow.
Okay, now back in the day, $75 was real money.
Yeah.
Well, suddenly Carmel and I we started doing a radio show. And when we first started, we had, no clue. And as we did it, we got better and better. We learned how to do the voice on radio and that you don't normally have. and we started getting guests calling in. We had Jerry Lawler. Carmella had some great contact, got Jerry Lawler, et cetera, et cetera. So we started getting a following, but WTTM in Trenton was basically limited to Trenton, okay?
Right.
Which was fine because that was 10 minutes from where the store was.
Sure.
Then Roger Crone gets a promotion. He leaves WTTM, and he goes to a station in Philly called WDVT, Delaware Valley Talk. It was owned by a guy by the name of Frank Ford. Okay. Well, Roger calls up and says, how about you switching from WTTM to WDVT? We'll give you 2 time slots. We'll give you Friday night and Sunday, which really messes up because the store is open Friday and Saturday.
Right.
We take it. And it was more expensive, but now we had a Philadelphia signal. Okay. Well, if you know anything about radio stations change hands all the time. Yeah. We get a phone call and we're told that WDVT is closing. We're going out of business. And so we couldn't even say goodbye to our fans because it was during the week.
Oh, geez.
Well, okay. Again, I'm not taking no for an answer. So Carmella and I are trying to strategize. Carmella, Paul, and I are trying to strategize what the hell we're doing here. You know, we can't just leave the radio at this point. So WIP, which was the sports station in Philly, we figured that's the place we got to call. We got to take a shot. Well, I had gone to high school with a woman by the name of Betty Berneman. And sure enough, she was affiliated with WIP. She was doing the weather and the news. And I figured, how many Betty Bernemans can there be? So I call up Betty Berneman, and somebody answers the phone, not Betty. It's a male. And I said, I'm calling for Betty Berneman. And he said, who is this? I said, Joel Goodhart, formerly from Rasslin Radio of WDVT. And there's a silence. And he starts telling me who he is. And he listened to us all the time. I want you to come into WIP. We'll sit and talk. It was Tom Brookshire. So Tom Brookshire answered the phone when WIP was first starting, when Betty Berneman wasn't there. I go up to WIP. Carmella couldn't make it. I think she had the baby at the time. She couldn't make it. So I go up to and who's sitting there but Tom Brookshire, who I'd never met, and the manager of the station, whose name totally escapes me. As it turns out, Tom Brookshire once flew from Philly to Dallas with Dusty Rhodes next to him. And so he became a hardcore wrestling fan. So he jumped at the idea of getting us on the radio on WIP, and that's how we wound up on WIP for 4 years.
Holy cow.
Now, it was more expensive because we were buying the time. A year or so in, Carmella couldn't do it anymore because the family situation, and then I wound up doing it on my own. So the radio show became kind of our TV for wrestling.
Yeah.
When they do something called the Q Factor, believe it or not, we had 22,000 listeners per quarter hour.
Wow.
And one of the things I've always said is, to this day, if every listener who listened to the program had bought tickets to my show, I'd still be in the wrestling business. Okay? Now, we drew some significant audiences at the Philadelphia Civic Center. We had 2,000, we had 2,500. But if you have 22,000 listeners, I literally had 90% of my listeners not come to the show. Had they come to the show, I could have run it out the Spectrum.
I remember many conversations, whether it was back at the wrestling school or the meetings at your apartment back in the day, and the conversation and discussion was just that. It was, we have 2,000 to 3,000 people at these huge Civic Center shows, but where are they for all of our other shows? Where are these people? Why are they not coming out?
Yeah, and look, the one thing I learned is you need the names on the card because they will draw people in. And to be honest with you, I paid a lot of money to have guys come in to help draw the people. And ultimately, the reason I went out of the business is I had too many people on the card.
Yeah.
Okay. And look, it's 30 years later. It's simple. You can figure out what went wrong. What I will tell you is, to this day, there are people who still talk about our matches. They talk about the Cactus Jack Eddie Gilbert feud. They talk about me when I brought the original Sheik in. They talked about all the stuff that we did at the Civic Center. We were the original Attitude Era. Okay. And when we went under, obviously ECW took it another step further, and Todd did a hell of a job with that. But for me, I had no TV. All they had was a Saturday morning radio show.
Mm-hmm.
It was what it was. And, essentially, this was a fan who, as it turned out, financially could afford to do it. I lost, as it turned out. I mean, numbers are numbers. It'll be in the book. I totally lost $168,000.
Wow.
Now, that $168,000 is over a number of years. That's the cost of the radio show, the cost of the cards, etc. And it generated money, and I spent to live on. But I lost, my net was negative $168,000. If you ask me right now if I do it again, the answer is yes. I got to tell you, I had more fun during those years. I always felt guilty. My two sons at the time, I was divorced, separated and divorced. And so I got them on the weekends. And when I was on the weekends I had wrestling shows.
Right.
Well, look, I did not get daddy time with the boys. They had a ball. Okay. They got to meet the wrestlers. They had a ball. Woman and my second son, Mark, had an affair. I swear to God, it was unbelievable. But the kicker was my boys sold programs. They watched the show. Again, they didn't have daddy time, but they talked about it to their friends at school. My son, Mark, actually brought me, you'll love this one, brought me into one of his, he was in 6th grade at the time. So what's that, 10 years old, whatever. And they have Parent Day, where you bring your mother or your dad in and they talk about their occupation. Well, I wasn't going to talk about financial services to a bunch of 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
So I decided I'm going to come in. So I went in with my wrestling radio jacket, my Zubaz pants. Everybody remembers the Zubaz pants.
Yep.
And I brought Larry Winters with me. God bless him.
Oh.
Larry came in oiled up with the championship belt on. And we walked through the hallways of Solace Cohen School to get to my son's classroom. Well, after these kids heard about dads who were firemen and policemen, we walked in. We were the hit of the school. People were walking by the door like crazy. And my son had it made for the whole year.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and these are stories that can't happen any other way.
No, that's crazy. So at what point then are you deciding, was it after doing that show with Crockett and all them on that Wednesday night? Was that when you said, all right, it's time to like start dabbling and doing our own promotions then?
No, actually, believe it or not, it was Dominic DeNucci and a conversation with Carmella, but it was Dominic DeNucci's idea. When Dominic came to our grand opening, Dominic and Bruno, Dominic actually kidded with us, you want to try promoting. So the first promotion we ever did was at Neshaminy High School. Now, again, you got to be an old timer to understand this one. The main event was Dominic DeNucci against the mighty Igor, who was the original Ivan Putski. And on that card, we had some startups. Shane Douglas was on that card because he was being trained by DeNucci. Right. Now, he wasn't under the name Shane Douglas at the time, and I see Shane all the time. We still talk about it. That show was the worst show you would ever. We had 100 people, and it was awful. We had sold the tickets at our store, so that got the feet wet. So Dominic got me started. Fortunately, I was able to see Dominic before he passed away, in Hamburg. So between that and then we did our own show. We tried that. They're very difficult without TV. Then we did the Crockett show. Now, when I was out on my own with WIP is when I created at that time Tri-State Wrestling.
Okay.
Now, when we first started, the first show was not Tri-State Wrestling. I didn't have the name. But my first main event I had was Junkyard Dog against Paul Jones.
Wow.
Okay, now they had a few 10 years prior.
Yeah.
Okay, and it was at Temple University's McGonigal Hall. And I thought the Junkyard Dog would get the word out. We were in the minority community. We thought Junkyard, as it turned out, we got our crowd from the radio show, not necessarily from the community.
Wow.
So one thing I learned was if you run a show, you better have a draw. Now, what was amazing to me is the guys that you have at the top, they're already getting paid. They know they're getting paid. Right. They're there because they're trying to make a living. The guys on the undercard are the ones that really make the show. And fortunately, we had enough talent in our area. We had obviously Larry Winters and DC Drake. We had
Mhm.
Tony Stetson and Johnny Hotbody. We had these guys. I mean, these are guys that had, again, some local following. They were known for the kind of wrestling that they did. We did chairs and tables before it was popular. We did outside. We had matches. Think about this one, Bay. We had a match in a steel cage with 20 wrestlers outside the cage, and the
Fighting to
winner
get
was
in.
the one who got in the cage. We had a reverse steel battle royal. We knew that the fans that worked with us loved blood. They loved blood for whatever reason, because quite frankly, the WWF at the time, there was very little blood.
Mm-mm.
We decided we're going to have a match. So we had a last to bleed battle royal. So you were in the ring. If you bled, you were thrown out. So there was only one guy that didn't bleed. So everybody knew with 20 wrestlers, there would be 19 guys who would bleed. Okay. Now, some of that was my creation, to be honest. But what you discover was the local talent made the show.
Yeah.
Now, what typically happens at one of these wrestling cards, even today, is the main event is always the top guys, and the under guys are the local guys. Well, we got to the point where our main guys were DC Drake, Johnny Hotbody. When we
Mhm.
did the black cards, and we
Yeah.
gave the black hearts the belt for the tag team championship, nobody expected that.
No.
Okay, because they beat the local guys to get it. Well, what put the local guys over is the fact that they lost to the main eventers. They were
Mhm.
in the ring and what a battle. I watch it today. It's just too much violence. Okay. So you suddenly realize in the wrestling, and Flair used to say this all the time, Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen had the worst win-loss records of any team wrestling ever. But they made the match because they lost by making the others look better.
Yep.
Well, DC Drake, Johnny Hotbody, Larry Winters, to this day, I still think they made the TWA. Johnny Hotbody, Tony Stetson, they had matches. I
Yeah.
couldn't ask these guys to do what they did. They did it anyway. And the
Yeah.
pay, my pay was reasonable. I will tell you to this day, what I paid the local guys is more than the local guys get today.
I was just going to say that. I was just going to say that.
All right. And the funny part, and again, it cost me money,
Yeah.
but I was a professional Monday through Friday. I'm treating these guys like a professional.
Right.
And I would pay them like a professional. Now, at some point, we realized that we needed to generate some new young talent. And so we created Ringmasters Wrestling School.
Right.
And that's where that came from. And the deal that I had at Ringmasters was you pay the tuition, and when you graduate, you're guaranteed spots, period. So if we do this right, you'll earn back more than you paid in your classes. And so the Sandman came from our school. I mean, I can go down a list of names. The Sandman came from our school, and Sandman obviously went on and made a nice living. Glenn Osborne, one time, he'll actually tell you that the reason he went to college was all the shows that we had and him working paid his college tuition.
Wow.
Okay. So we were running 25, 30, 35 shows a year. We had the main events at the Philadelphia Civic Center, and then we had fundraisers, but we had locals. And we did local high school gyms and what have you. And because we were on WIP radio, that really helped. It really helped. It gave us exposure. Unfortunately, it wasn't the internet. It wasn't TV. But we got it done.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, still to this day, like those shows were like such at a high level, and when you ended up closing, and then Todd came in and took things over and started ECW and Eastern Championship Wrestling, the quality of shows just went downhill drastically. Like I was never, and even when I started working for Todd at that point, like I didn't like the shows at all. Like I was just like, man, it's just the whole heart and everything of it's gone. It lost its whole edge and everything. It got very. It became, in my opinion, it became like the opposite of what you were working on, and that I think that's what Todd was trying to do, was make a different creation. It wasn't. He was trying not to just be TWA all over again, but it just didn't
and
work.
what's interesting is if you try to do something different. Look, I went back. I didn't file bankruptcy, but I ran out of money.
Right.
So for him to do the same thing that I did would be he'd be out of money. Well, as it turned out, he went out of money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, wrestling is a very difficult sport to manage in terms of the financial. Look, I'll tell you, hindsight. Dennis Caraluzzo, who used to run the shows with Larry
Mhm.
Sharp in South Jersey,
Right.
he had a completely different model,
Yeah.
and his shows, my opinion, weren't as good as mine. He
Mhm.
might have one big name, and then all the local guys, but again, they had the Monster Factory.
Yeah.
He made money.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you can talk about my shows, and we did it. We had the radio, we had the shows, we had Ringmaster Wrestling School. Guess what? Sometimes if you just run your local show and you run it once every couple of months, and
Yeah.
you make $1,000 or something, and at the end of the day, you had some fun and you made a couple of dollars.
Right.
So it really it's an issue because I don't think there's any, unless you have a bankroll that's just second to none. I mean, think about this. A billionaire bought the WCW and
Mhm.
sold it.
Right.
He
Right.
couldn't make money with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, if Ted Turner can't make money with it, how the hell does Joel Goodhart do it?
Yeah.
And the answer is
That's
it
right.
can't be done. It's a type of business that's very difficult.
Now, how about All right. Let me ask you this though. I got for my own personal thing. I was a student at Ringmasters I was probably the longest student there was.
Yeah, you were tough.
I was like I tell this story all the time in interviews and stuff like that, and I've never had the chance to ask you this question, and it got to a point. I mean, I was it was a year and a half I was at that wrestling school at this point, and I watched many people come in, and 3-4 months later they're working matches, and here I am still trying to freaking flip. I could work a match, I just couldn't flip, and I had
It was amazing.
Yeah, but it got to one point where I said, you know what? I said to myself, like, screw this. I'm fucking done. I'm quitting. This is not for me. And I called you up and I told you that, and you
Yeah.
were like, no, you're not. You're not quitting. Come to the school this Friday. I'm gonna have something there for you. Just come to the school. I'm like, all right. So I go there and I show up, and you come walking in with Paul Orndorff and Buddy Landel. And I always wanted to know, why did you stick behind me and not say, all right, you know what, goodbye?
Because I make a commitment. One of my problems is I made a commitment. You pay us, you're going to work matches. You had paid us, and after a year and a half of of watching you do those flips, it was weird because I had a show I believe that was a Friday. I might be wrong, but I had a show the next day, and I had Paul and Buddy come in. And I told them, I said, they wanted to go work out at the gym. So we had the affiliation with the gym. So as we're driving over there, I said to them, by the way, I got somebody you got to help me with. And Paul and Buddy helped you out. It was weird. The one thing about the wrestling community is there are no secrets.
Yeah.
And they heard about this. And I said to them, the guy just can't get this flip. And one of the things they told me was it's all between his ears. It has nothing to do with his legs, nothing to do with his body. After a year and a half, it's not the body.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. King Kong Bundy can do a flip. Andre the Giant can do a flip. Chubby can do it. Well, you weren't chubby back then, but Bay can do the flip. And lo and behold, okay.
Yeah.
And when Paul and Buddy came in, your eyes, I remember, they became headlights.
Well, Orndorff was he was a piece of work. He got in the ring, we locked up, we did some moves, and he hip tossed me, and I'm looking up at Paul Orndorff, and he goes, "You know what your problem is, boy? You're too fat." And he walked out, and I was like, "What the hell just happened?" And then he went and worked out, and then Buddy got in the ring. He's like, "Don't listen to that asshole."
Yeah.
But that day formed until sadly Buddy passed, a lifelong relationship with me and Buddy too.
Yeah. Buddy was one of our TWA champs at some point.
Mm-hmm.
We developed, it's funny. We had, as the Cactus Jack,
mm-hmm.
basically we didn't have contracts. Every show I have, you're on it unless you can't make it.
Right. Buddy
Landel, you're on every show unless you can't make it. I said the same thing to Austin Idol. Okay. If you need a date filled and you're on the show, we'll figure it out. I did the same thing with Jerry Lawler. We wound up having some serious relationships with a lot of these, what I'll call main eventers.
Mm-hmm.
What's amazing is that when the independents were strong back when I was there,
mm-hmm.
these guys were looking for work and they needed the Joel Goodharts to do it.
Yeah.
Now, the UWF came along, Herb Abrams,
Right.
who obviously had more money and did TV, but they started working for Herb Abrams. There was people all over the place, and they knew in the Philly area. Keep in mind this: one of my shows outdrew the NWA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, basically the same building. They had the big building, we had the small building, but a week apart, we actually outdrew crowd.
Yeah.
So there's just, I remember these things like they were yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, you'll love this little story, and this will be in the book. I booked Jerry Lawler against Curry Von Erich, and this was a show at Temple University. And Curry Von Erich had a reputation for doing no-shows.
Yeah.
And I hated no-shows. Oh, I hated no-shows. Well, as it turned out, Lawler and Curry fought Friday night at the Sportatorium in Texas. And so they were going to take the first flight out from Texas to come to the Philly show that I was having at McGonigal Hall.
Okay.
Now, the show started at 1 o'clock. Main event came on, 3:30, something like that. So they fly into Philly. I paid Jerry Lawler a couple $100 extra to make sure that Curry was on the plane. Okay. Now, think about this one. You can only now. Obviously, I had a relationship with Jerry Lawler, and we could talk about it. They land in Philadelphia, and my former brother-in-law, this guy by the name of Scott Simon, nice guy, was able to pick them up at the airport. Okay, Curry gets in the car, and the first thing Curry Von Erich says to Scott is, "I want a Pat steak. I'm starving." All right, so now I happen to like Gino's better than Pat's, but that's a whole nother story. They go down to South Philly, and I believe Curry gets 2 steak sandwiches. Okay. They then drive to McGonigal Hall. They get there, I think it was halftime. I might be wrong. It was during intermission. Enough time. I get to meet Curry. I sit down with we do our thing. Curry gets in the ring. When we do the announcements, Curry gets in the ring and literally goes over to the ring announcer and says, "What city am I in?" Now, think about this. He flew from Dallas to Philly with Lawler, lands in Philly, goes to Pat Steaks, comes to Temple University, wants to know what city he's in. And then at some point, he takes the microphone and he says, "Hey, Philadelphia, I'm going to kick Lawler's ass." Okay? But Curry was so wrecked, he didn't even know what town he was in. But I made sure that we didn't have a no-show. And that happens because you build a relationship with Jerry Lawler. Now, I'll give you one more story, and I don't know if you wanted me to go into this or not. The first show that I had at Temple University, Junkyard Dog, as I said, Paul Jones.
Right.
But my second main event was David Sammartino against Larry Zbyszko to kind of get that feud going.
Mm-hmm.
Larry Zbyszko had Paul E. Dangerously in his corner.
Right.
And David Sammartino had Bruno Sammartino in his corner. So, of course, I wanted to get Bruno and Larry in there at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't happen. At the end of the matches, I go back, and I'm a new kid here with shows.
Right.
And the guys are all dressed to shower, but they're waiting to get paid. Bruno comes back, and Bruno was not wrestling, so he was not sweaty. Right there in the dressing room, Bruno says, "Joel, I have to leave to go catch a plane back to Pittsburgh. Just mail me my check." When he did that, he signaled to every wrestler, "I'm good for the money." And that worked with me for years.
Wow.
For years. They all heard the story. It was unbelievable. Okay? And I don't know who said it, but they all heard that Bruno said, "Send me my check." And that was just, you talk about a reputation. That was a reputation. I had two reputations. One is I paid, and the other one is I overpaid. Okay? And the guys, but here's what happened. I overpaid everybody, but those guys put out for me. To this day, 30 years later, they're still talking about the matches.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Like, I mean, Eddie Gilbert and Cactus, those matches. I mean, that the first independent show I ever went to was that 2 out of 3 falls with them, the Autumn Armageddon. Yep. I think that was it.
Yeah, it was Summer Sizzler.
Yeah.
And that show, the 2 out of 3 falls, was my worst revenue show at the Civic Center.
Wow.
It was in the summer. It was a tough one, but those matches, and Cactus wrote about me in his book. And Have a Nice
Mhm.
and a Fine Day. I'm in the book on 12 pages by name. To this day, those matches got him to WCW.
Mhm.
Okay, ultimately he got to, and God knows he's a millionaire. So that it was amazing. And those guys, when they came, they knew that what they were going to do. When Cactus went to the hospital with the stitches, I mean, I felt so bad. And he says to me, occupational hazard. That was his term.
Wow.
Okay. His wife or girlfriend at the time used to sit on the
Mhm.
stage and said to me, "What's he doing?" I said, "Go ask him. What are you asking me for?" All right. And the one thing I did, I was not the, I believe in the wrestling world. You're a promoter, you're a booker, you're a wrestler.
Mhm.
And you need to separate the three. I was a promoter. I'm not going to tell somebody how to wrestle. Okay. I never wrestled a day in my life. I was at the wrestling school, did some moves, did some bumps, but
Mhm.
I'm not a wrestler. I had Larry Winters as my booker. Okay. And he took care of the dressing room. And his way of booking was classic. We need 30 minutes, have a ball. Okay. What we need is some violence. We need the crowd, just play by the crowd.
Right.
And every one of the main eventers had an easy day because they got it. They got it. They understood what they had to do. I didn't have to tell them what to do. Cactus, we came up with the three falls, the 2 out of 3 falls. We came up with that in conjunction with Eddie and Cactus. Okay,
Wow.
so it wasn't. I can't take full credit. It was, but the idea of the 2 to 3 falls mixed during the card,
Mhm.
the idea of Johnny Hotbody being pinned on the wall,
Right.
that was
Classic.
my baby. Okay, because the whole story is put your shoulders down. It doesn't say shoulders on the canvas or shoulders on the floor. So we did a pin against the wall, and Pro Wrestling Illustrated did a whole article on that.
Mhm.
People may not know this, and I won't go into details. Halloween Havoc, which was at the Philadelphia Civic Center,
Right.
we had Bruno Sammartino as the guest referee inside that Thunderdome.
Right.
That was my baby. And the
Wow.
true story, and this was written up in the Daily News. Ric Flair calls me up at home. Now, he had my cell number. Ric Flair calls me up and says, "We need to get Bruno Sammartino to be in that ring to help us draw. Can you give me Bruno's phone number?" And I was just protective as hell. I said, "I don't give out anybody's phone numbers at all. If you want to talk to Bruno, we got to do a 3-way call." We did a 3-way call. Now, picture this. I'm sitting in my office. On my phone is Bruno Sammartino talking to Ric Flair. They made the deal. End of story. Now,
Wow.
when I was growing up, Bruno Sammartino was a god.
Sure.
Ric Flair's, I mean, I'm sitting there listening to the, it
Flair
was
was your
unbelievable.
boy. Flair. That was your big thing. I always remember that. Like Flair was your thing.
Yep. Well, it was fun. Always liked the bad guys.
Mhm.
And Flair and the Horsemen, my license plate on my car, if you remember, was 4HRSMN. That was my license plate. And I had a white Cadillac. And for some reason, I'd be driving and people would blow the horn. They knew it was me. But yeah, Four Horsemen was my license plate. We had a dinner with Ric Flair. Somebody still
Mhm.
has the video where we made him Wrestler of the Decade. And I made 2 belts up. Flair has one belt. I have the other. My
Right.
one belt hangs up in my office here. And he has the other belt above his fireplace.
Wow. That's amazing.
It's
Now
amazing.
let's talk about the closing because when I just found like it's amazing. Like I was going through and doing some searches about you, on the internet and YouTube and all, and I saw this. Somebody did like these video interviews of it must have been during early ECW, Extreme Time, and they were talking to Bob Artiste and Larry Winters and John Finnegan and Donnie Allen, and Larry actually said that he got a call from Todd Gordon a few days before you made the announcement that Joel's going to announce that he's closing up the business. And Larry, like, kind of, from what it sounded like, Larry kind of didn't believe him. And then, fast forward a few days later, you make the announcement on Wrestling Radio. Did why did you decide at that point? I mean, you were like a week or two away from this big show that, in my eyes, was going to be the show of all shows
No question.
to put you on the map worldwide forever.
Yeah, no question. So what happened was,
why pull the plug?
That show that's going to put me on the map worldwide was underselling ridiculously. It was clear I was going to lose my shirt. Now, what happened was, at the time, both Todd and Bob Ortiz had financed some of TWA, and now that money was gone.
Gotcha.
Okay? Now, Todd claims that he owned part of TWA. I borrowed the money. Now, never paid it back, but I borrowed the money.
Sure.
And Bob gave me some money. We got the show. Here I was going to have Nature Boy Buddy Rogers against Buddy Landell. I had matches. This was going to be an awesome card. It wasn't selling. Lo and behold, I had to make a decision. This was right after the first of the year, because when I went on the radio, it was January 18th of 1992.
Okay.
So during the week, I just made a decision. I got to walk. Now, the only way I know how to do this is to disappear. All right. So I called Larry Winters, who was my booker from day one. And I think it was a Wednesday or Thursday. And I told Larry, I said, hey, you're going to listen to the show on Saturday. I'm doing my swan song. I'm done. Now, at that point, I didn't know that Todd and Larry spoke, that Todd called Larry or Larry spoke to Todd. But I went on the radio show Saturday morning. At the very beginning, I didn't announce that the card is off. During the show, I did, because people started calling in regarding that. And then I had my little speech at the end where I basically ended. If you remember with Wrestling Radio and with TWA, we had a saying, we had T-shirts. I'm out of the closet, no longer meek. I'm finally admitting I'm a wrestling freak. That was a great one. And then the other thing that we had, we wrestled, we brawled, we did it all. So I closed the radio show. We wrestled, we brawled, I tried it all, and that was it. Now that was
I got chills as you're saying this, because
I still do it. That was the 18th of January. I had cut off my phone for Squared Circle on that Friday. So literally everybody tried to call me. The phones were disconnected. I came back to my apartment. It is what it is. And the only people who knew where I lived, quite frankly, were the wrestlers who had the meetings at the apartment. But at that point, Todd took over, and some of the guys just avoided even talking to me. That being said, I wanted to disappear. And I got back on Monday, went back to my business, and I just moved forward. I had to get a hold Monday or Tuesday of the State Athletic Commission, because they had my bond. They liquidated the bond, and the people who had bought advance tickets got their money back, or whatever the percentage was.
Right.
But it was just, you can't leave the business part-time. And I will say this, January 18th of 92 to the day Mike Tartaglia, Michael Bruno, called me in October of 2009, I think it was. I had not watched wrestling on TV, not looked at ECW, not looked at WWF, and nothing. I avoided it because I just knew. I knew all the guys. Mike Tartaglia gives me a call one day. He got me at the office. He got my number somehow. And he says to me, he wants to start promoting again. Can I use TWA? Okay. And what am I going to say? No, after 25 years, you can't use it.
Right.
So he used it. Little did I know he was going to bury it, but he did it.
Well, it's when you made that announcement, I'll tell you this. And I was finally set to debut, a few weeks after that show in February at the FOP Hall. And I sat there. I would sit there. I used to work a telemarketing job at that time, and I was working and listening to the show. And you made the announcement, and I literally just sat at the desk, hysterical, crying. I was like, a year and a half, I just tried to do this, and now, like, what do I do now? Like, the one person that believed in me, just like he's gone, and I'm like, I'm gonna with the phone. I'm like trying to call you. I'm like, it's fucking disconnected. It's busy. Like, what the hell's going on? And then I'm like, I'm calling Janetti, and I'm calling Osborne, and calling this one and that one. Everybody's like, what the hell's going on? And it was, wow.
Yeah, it was a shocker. It was a shocker for me, obviously. It was a shocker for the listeners. It was a shocker. Again, I still say this. I had 22,000 listeners, and I had maybe 1,000 tickets sold for that show, and promoting it like crazy, it wasn't working.
Yeah.
And I thought that the Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, Buddy Landell would have been in every magazine. We had a press conference at the original Sports Bar at 8th and Market, where we did a legitimate press conference with Buddy Rogers and with Buddy Landell, which I just couldn't pull it off. And there was no money. I mean, I wasn't going to be able to pay anybody. And these guys are all flying in. The airline tickets, and in hindsight, that was the biggest cost. Yeah. I was always happy to have Bam Bam Bigelow in my car because he drove.
Right.
Okay. But everybody else was flying in, whether it was Jerry Lawler, Austin Idol. I had a match. I don't know if you remember this, at the Civic Center. And this was a typical Mark and me. I wanted Adrian Street to be in Philadelphia. Okay. And I had Adrian Street against Boogie Woogie, Jimmy Valiant, who had those guys had a feud 10 years before that ripped up Georgia. I couldn't get it. I talked to Adrian. He doesn't want to come up north. He doesn't come north to the Mason-Dixon line. But I found out something about Adrian Street. And lo and behold, I found somebody out in Pittsburgh that liked what he wanted. So I told Adrian, I arranged for you to fly into Pittsburgh, take a look at what this guy's got, and now you'll drive to Philly and you'll do the show. And, of course, he and Linda came to Philly. I won't get into what it was. He came to Philly. He did a show. The match sucked. You can see it on YouTube if you look at it. It's a horrendous match. But I brought Adrian Street to Philadelphia. Well, the problem is that match, I had to fly two people, Adrian and Linda, from where they lived. I had to fly Jimmy Valiant from where he lived. I had to get hotel rooms and then pay them.
Yeah.
They didn't generate the revenue for me that I wanted, but I got agency. And it was just, that's where sometimes the fan in me took over.
Well, how about like another one that you pulled off, and you were trying to do it for years, and you called it Goodhart Delivers, Abby versus Sheik.
That one was amazing. Now, some people may not know about this, about the Sheik. The Sheik could not fly on an airplane. All right. He was banned from every airline in the United States. Literally banned. Okay. So I get a hold of him through Abby, obviously. And he had heard of me. He had heard of my show. He heard I paid well. He says to me, for me, it's 3 days because I got to drive there and drive back. I said, well, look, we're going to do what we got to do. We got to get this match. It's Goodhart Delivers. I get the match set up. Nobody believed that the Sheik was coming out of retirement to do my show. Well, Sheik doesn't drive a lot either. So Sheik had his driver bring him. Now, maybe you know this, maybe you don't. His driver was Sabu.
Sabu, yep.
Okay. So Sabu did one of his first shows with me. He was a throw into a battle royal. But Sabu was his driver. Well, Sabu's 57 now. I see him all the time. We talk about it all the time. I didn't help Sabu get started because obviously Sheik is training him. But I gave him a break.
Yeah.
Now, it was a small break, and it wasn't going to make his career. He made a career on his own for sure. But I got Sheik and Abby, and then I got it multiple times. And then one time I actually have a barbed wire steel cage match where we took the steel cage, wrapped it in barbed wire. They stayed inside the cage for about 5 minutes, and everybody's booing. That lasted a half hour.
Yep.
And the one thing Abby used to tell me, the match in the ring don't mean shit. Watch what we do outside after the match. And here's another one. He told me a story. Everybody remembers Jimmy Snuka flying off the top of the steel cage onto Don Morocco at Madison Square Garden. Sure. Everybody remembers that. That was after the match was over. Okay? It's not the match. It's what happens after the match, and that was Abby's code. So when you go back and look at that video now, it's 5 minutes after the match is over. Okay? And people don't remember the match.
That I'll tell you what, that match, I was actually standing on the stage with Owen Hart and Medusa and somebody else, and they were fighting coming up the ramp of the stage, and I was like, oh my God. And I remember I went behind the curtain, I was hiding, and Abby was just looking, bleeding. He's got, I think, like a sign in his hand or a bat or something. and I was like, I'm dead. I had nightmares of that for 30 years. Like,
Well, and it's legit. And it's funny. I saw Abby years ago down at his restaurant, which is now closed. I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and I went out to his restaurant. I took 5 or 6 people with me. We wound up sitting there for 4 hours eating and talking and all. The bill was like $89, and he had some of the best ribs. It was unbelievable. Anyway,
what was the ultimate goal though? Was your goal ever to like have TV?
the answer is yes and no. I knew that financially I couldn't handle TV. So if I was going to handle TV, I needed to find a money guy.
Right.
Okay. I was having trouble. Todd was a money guy, but not that kind of money.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I have stories now. ECW closed up with $8 million of debt, whatever it was. The only way to make TV is you got to have the money to do it. All the guys that work for me, Kevin Sullivan, Eddie Gilbert, they all wanted me to get TV because it guarantees the money.
Yeah.
Okay. Could I have gotten TV at the time? No. Financially, I just couldn't do it. And quite frankly, if you bring money people in, you got to make money. And that starts the pressure. And everybody's heard the stories about Paulie and Eddie Gilbert and with Todd Gordon. And these guys, they wanted to spend so much money. Lo and behold, they didn't have anything left.
Right.
Okay. So was TV a goal? Yes. Was it going to happen? No.
No. Did you, after you closed though, at that point, the internet really wasn't even really a thing yet, but once the internet started happening, did you start like looking at things and keeping tabs on what was going on? Nothing.
In fact, I'll go one better. I had a phone book with everybody's phone numbers and I shredded it.
Wow.
I didn't want to call anybody. And it's funny. The last person that I spoke to before it was announced was Ricky Steamboat. I was trying to get something done with Steamboat, and he was the last quote unquote main eventer that I spoke to, but I actually shredded the phone book.
Wow.
And now what's amazing in writing this book, the back page of the book will have to be kept up current of all the ones that worked for me at some point who have passed away.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely scary. I mean, it's over 2 pages.
Oh, I can imagine.
Of wrestlers that appeared on my show. I mean, the one thing I remember watching news the day that Owen Hart died, and I didn't watch the match. I wasn't watching the matches, but Owen passed away, and the guy who brought Owen to the States is me.
Yeah.
I brought him to the States. Now, obviously, he was connected and everything fine, but I brought him to the States, and when he did his match at the Philadelphia Civic Center, everybody applauded the match at the end. Both wrestlers got an applause, Japanese and plus Owen. I felt bad when he passed away, when Scotty Bam Bam Bigelow passed away. These were people that were friends of mine.
Yeah.
Okay, Larry Winters and I were brothers. Okay, and he passed away. And again, the list is a mile long, and it's just scary. Every year there's another 4, 5, 6 of them. It's really scary.
It's sad.
Yep.
How about you mentioned Mike Tartaglia, Mike Bruno, when he makes that call to you. Was it an immediate yes to come back to the wrestling world, or?
Okay, so here's what happened. It was a yes, go use the TWA name.
Okay.
He calls me several more times and says to me, why don't you come to the matches? And I said to Mike, I don't want to go. I really don't want to go. Who's on the card? So he tells me the card. Now, as it turned out, I decided against my best, I'm going. I go to the show, and I'm sitting in the parking lot as the guys are going in with their luggage and whatever. And I saw Larry Winters, and I hadn't seen Larry in 20 years, whatever it was. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to walk in, and these guys are all going to yell at me. They're all going to scream at me. What the fuck did you do? Excuse my English. I walk in. Larry Winters meets me at the door, literally. Once you know, thank you, thank you, thank you. Mike Kalua, King Kalua was there. Tom Brandy was there. It was just crazy. Glenn Osborne was there. And Glenn, of course, thanks me big time. If I remember correctly, Buddy Landell was the main guy on the card to change the belt from Glenn Osborne to Glenn Osborne. So Buddy was there. I was treated like royalty.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, I don't know about you, but it's not hard to get a big head. Okay. Well, once I got that in me again, then I started going to a couple of the shows. Okay. Then the TWA was going to be dismantled in favor of the CCWA, and they were going to have matches. I realized at the time they took the TWA name, but they basically ended it.
Yeah.
Now I know Mike's trying to start the TWA up again. Okay. He had a show booked in November. It couldn't happen because he got sick with COVID. But so I don't know if he's going to continue that or not. I one time suggested to Mike, if you're going to do a TWA show, you should have a current wrestler, and in the corner have a TWA wrestler, because most of us are too damn old to start messing around. I sold DC Drake, the last Icons, not the one that was just happening the other day, but the one before that. He was there. It was the first time I'd seen DC since I terminated. It was the second time I spoke to him. And of course, he said, let's do it. So everybody that's around, I think, would like the idea. Now, whether it draws money, I have no clue.
Right.
Okay. But I think there's enough people around that understood what the TWA was all about that maybe they come. So it was, to answer your question, I gave Mike the yes immediately. I'm not going to say no. I didn't charge him. Just go use the name. It took a couple calls from Mike to have me get there. And again, my best wishes said, my best intentions don't do it. But I went and got the big head.
Did you ever think yourself about trying to promote again?
I will tell you once or twice a week. Okay. Here's what and this just is me. I don't go to a lot of shows these days, but I go to the ECWA because I did Joel Blackheart for them back in 2003, 2004. And to this day, I still believe that I can put on a hell of a show. I also believe I can lose a lot of money doing it. Okay. And at the same time, today, there's not enough independents around that are going to work for money that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. And back in the day, I mean, when you look at my card, I had Rick Rude, I had Honky Tonk. I mean, I can go through the whole list. And these guys were easy to work with. They were easy to work with. When I get an Austin Idol and a Paulie Dangerously and a Jerry Lawler and a Curry Von Erich, they're all looking for paydays. I mean, let's be honest. Yeah. But I have to travel them. I got to house them, all this kind of stuff. And then today, for me, if I wanted to promote a show, you don't even want to know what the ticket prices would be.
Yeah.
Okay, because if I did a show, it'd be $100 a seat for the front row. The scary part is selling the front row is not hard.
Yeah, it's all the other rows.
It's selling row 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Yeah.
Okay, so what you discover is people are willing to pay top dollar to get the best seats. And then they have to decide, and then you get someone say, well, if it's not raining, I'll go.
Right.
What happens for us as promoters is tickets in advance that make it all work. If you're buying tickets the night of the show, especially with COVID now, who the hell knows? It's advanced tickets. So I got to the point where I had advanced tickets. I had that ticket plan. Well, I found out I so undercharged those tickets, it was crazy. Okay, because I could have gotten any number I picked. Why is the seat worth $20 versus $25?
Right.
Okay. Well, the front row today for hardcore, there's 20. No, you could get more as long as you have the right talent.
Yeah.
The local, I will say one thing: most of the local talent today is way better than the local talent that we had. The problem is that today they do bump after bump after bump after bump, and nobody cares about that stuff. You still have to get in the ring, and if you have 10 minutes, you have to learn to tell a story in 10 minutes. Okay? And these guys get in the ring, and they think that they don't have to tell a story. And I don't care if your first match. One thing I always talked about was the first match had to be a major match. Because if you went to the matches late, people thought that they could miss the garbage matches.
Yeah.
Well, one of my first matches was Eddie Gilbert against Al Perez with Jimmy Cornette in a first match. So we always try to do something first to keep people getting there early. Okay. Now, all that being said, would those principles work today? I have no clue because, to be honest, I'm so far removed from the wrestling business.
Yeah.
I don't know that old school even works. Okay. I don't know that it works. Look, and I will tell you, when I did it, I thought it worked. It didn't. Okay. The ultimate result was it didn't. But
At what point did you realize it wasn't working?
I'd say 2 shows before the last one.
Wow.
I mean, it was getting tough when I had the 2 out of 3 falls with Eddie Gilbert and Cactus, and that was my worst drawing show. I think I had 800 people.
Yeah.
It was a sign. I needed to get Ric Flair. Okay, if you watch some of my videos, the crowd starts chanting Ric Flair, because
Right.
that was the time when he was having problems. And I had spoken to Rick, and he told me it was $5,000 for him to even do a spot.
Wow.
Okay, but by the time I got back to him, he signed on with WWF or signed on with WCW. Flair was very easy to deal with. He helped me as much as he could, getting hold of people. I don't know if we have time. I'll give you one other great story. The night of Ric Flair's dinner in Philadelphia.
Okay.
He was not on the show. The main event, believe it or not, was the Iron Sheik against Ricky Steamboat.
Okay.
Talk about a lousy match, okay?
Yeah.
Ric Flair was in Baltimore in the afternoon. We had an afternoon show. Crockett had an afternoon show in Baltimore, the night show in Philly. We had to drive, so I got a limo, and I had a limo for me and Flair to get to Philadelphia to do the dinner. Well, needless to say, once they knew that I had a car, they were renting cars. I wound up having people come into the limo with me.
Right.
Now, picture this. I have a limo with Ric Flair and me, with Rick Steiner and Scott Steiner, Jim Ross, and the Road Warriors.
Oh, geez.
Okay. Now, the roadies were so damn big, you couldn't sit in the seats. Now, here's the main. This is a story. I wish I had a video camera. We're riding up 95. There's a pussycat. Halfway up 95, and we blow a tire.
Oh, geez.
We pull into the median, and Flair says to me, let's go walk in the median and talk about what we're doing tonight. So Flair and I are walking the median. Now, nobody knows who the hell I am. Everybody's blowing the horn. Okay? I turn around, and there's the car being lifted up by Scott Steiner. Instead of using a jack, Scott lifts the back so they can put another tire on. We then get to Philadelphia. They don't go to the dinner. They go into the dressing room. Ric Flair comes to my dinner, and the rest is history. But I can't make this stuff up. Okay? The roadies were talking. Scott literally lifted up the freaking car to change a tire.
I was expecting one of the roadies to lift the car up.
It was unbelievable. Oh, I would have thought that. And it was funny because Jim Ross was with us. Jim came to the dinner. If you remember that we had, if you were there with Flair, I didn't have to pay Jim anything. He just had nothing to do before the show. So he came to the dinner. Elliot Murnick, the guy that was my contact with Crockett, came to the dinner. Wow. So the word got out, and that's where we really started with the lunches. And I had some of the main eventers of Crockett do lunches.
Yeah.
And back then, they didn't have agents.
Wow.
All right. So all they wanted was X number of dollars, and they do what they got to do.
I can't wait for this book.
Well, I go over 10 of the greatest matches that we had. What's amazing is that I had 10 of the greatest matches. Okay. There are some interviews with some of the John Finnegans and the Joe Zanolis and whatever, some of the referees, with some of the wrestlers as well. It's a book that, and I'm convinced, the only one that will enjoy the book is me. Okay? But the more I talk about it, the more I think people will read it and remember where they were on that day, were they at the match, etc. And Scott Teal and Dan Murphy did a great job. It's not done yet, but it's let's just say I read it and I'm pretty impressed.
That's awesome. I can't wait for this. I cannot wait.
Well, I'll make sure when it comes out, I'll contact you and we can talk about it again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we can go on for hours and hours. But real quick, we got to tell everybody the one funny story of us is I used to go up to New York City for to buy cupcakes, and one day I go up there to buy cupcakes, and I had to go to the bathroom. I run in Starbucks to use their bathroom, and I'm standing there at the glass of Starbucks, and I'm looking outside, and I see Goodhart walking by. I'm like, Joel Goodhart, and I run out. I'm like, Joe.
All of a sudden, I'm in New York City, and I'm here, Joel Goodhart. It was amazing. Yep. But you waited to get your cupcakes.
I got my cupcakes.
There you go.
Absolutely.
That's
Too funny. Well, Joel, I want to thank you for doing this. Seriously, I always love talking to you, and I also want to thank you for sticking by me and pushing me and believing me for all those years, and also too, we did have contact through those years. You weren't hiding, and I used to be able to call you and ask you for advice with wrestling, and when I was starting to promote stuff, and you always answered the phone for me after a couple years, but you did answer the phone and try to help me, and I will always be appreciative to you for everything you've done for me. I just want to thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. You're a friend for life, no question.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joel. And anybody, do you want anybody to reach out to you at all?
Believe it or not, I'm not on social media. Here's what happens. Anytime somebody gets my email address, my phone number, I start getting the typical questions that can't be answered without a 20, just like your question. You asked me a question, I gave you 10, 15 minutes. Okay. Let's just say if somebody wants to find me bad enough, they can find me. Once the book comes out, you'll obviously have a forwarding, but if you want to get a hold of me, get a hold of Bay, bother the shit out of him, and then he'll feed it to me.
I'll screen your calls.
You got it.
All right.
Appreciate it.
All right, Joel. Take care of yourself, and let's do this again once that book's ready.
For sure. Thanks, Bay.
You got it.
Take care. Bye-bye.